Father in heaven, we ask that you would be with us today as we open your word, and the Spirit that inspired it, we pray, would lead us and guide us to the actual meaning and the intent that you have had in these words that we're going to be looking at. Father, help it to be clear. May your Spirit lead each of us so that we would discern the truth in the word that we're going to be reading and discussing. We pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, so we are looking at the identity of the little horn. Now, a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion on this, and rightly so, because there's a lot of people that have gone before us who have come up with conclusions on all these prophetic visions. And people have been studying these visions for thousands of years, actually. Daniel, the book of Daniel was written around in the 500 plus AD or BC. So that puts it over 2 millennia ago. So people have been studying these writings before that, thinking that, you know, they might see glimpses of what's going on in their day. However, these visions are within themselves very clearly, and we're going to be looking at some of this, very clearly within the visions themselves and the interpretations of those visions, very clearly it tells us when these things would happen. And so when people try and apply these visions in the past, and we're going to be unpacking this, and this is part of the why I'm doing this and want to make it so clear, because those that have gone before us have thought they have come up with the interpretation of these visions, and they have laid these prophecies down in history to the point where there's really not much of the prophecy itself to be fulfilled. And so we're going to try and get through some of this, what I'm terming as disinformation. Have you guys heard that word before? Disinformation? Yeah, it seems to be a word that just gets spit out all the time these days. Yeah, and so we want to get through this information and determine what is disinformation and what is actually information. And why am I doing this? The primary reason I've come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, the reason why we have prophecy, and specifically end time prophecy that we're looking at, is so that we can know for certainty. And I use that word and emphasize it because we need to know for certainty that we are in the time of the end. And there's the obvious reason why we need to know that, because we would actually change some things in our lives if we actually felt we were knocking on the door of eternity. And some might say, well, you need to live as if Yeshua was coming tonight. Well, yes, but there are things that I would do differently if I knew he was actually coming tonight. So that's just the reality. And you really can't argue with that. You can try, but there's really no argument for that. And, you know, I tell this story now and again, the reality of it. I used to belong to a church. And the government inspector was coming, and they wanted to rally all the troops in the church to go out and do a big cleanup, get everything in its proper place before the government inspector. Well, if they were living what they professed, then it would be ready for the government inspector every day of the year. But the reality is, as people, as finite human beings, we do tend to put off to tomorrow some things that we should do today. Can anyone relate to that? Anyone? No? No one can relate to that. Okay, I saw some hands, so that's good. You're with me. So the point being is, if we actually knew that this year in the United States, there would be a civil war, if you actually knew that, what would you do about it? Well, that would mean different things for different people. But I am sure that you would make some kind of preparation for that, if you were a thinking person, that is. And so that's kind of my point. What we have coming in the time of the end is much, much more severe and radical than just a little civil war in the United States. This is why I believe that we absolutely need to know the time that we're living in. And the prophecies pinpoint exactly not only the events, but the timing of those events. So the what is coming and the when is portrayed in the prophecies. Without question, it is clearly portrayed in the prophecies. No question about it. And as we study it, we can see that very clearly. So that's kind of the why we're looking at this. Now, when it comes to the little horn is key in these prophecies because the little horn is actually responsible in human terms, because I believe that little horn represents a human power, a political power / religious power on this planet. And so we need to know about this little horn because he's the one that's responsible. This power is responsible for the ultimate persecution and the mass genocide against God's people in the time of the end. So who wouldn't want to know about that if you're a biblical oriented person? And so that's why the little horn people are starting to say, well, who is the little horn? What is Babylon? All these things. We've had questions come in this week looking at the idea that Babylon, or the harlot, is Jerusalem. And so that was a question, is the harlot Jerusalem? Because that seems to be what it indicates. Well, yes and no to that question. In its fullest extent, yes, it is, but then it has to be understood in its context, and there's more to it than just saying that the harlot is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to play into the harlot, no question about it. So we want to start to understand these things kind of mostly in their context. So, so this is why we're looking at this. And we're going to get to, we want to look at the importance of the prophecies and just see why it's saying what it's saying. And then we can focus on the who that's in those prophecies. We're going to be looking at the who that is revealed in the time of the end because it's very clear. God has not left us to guess about these things. You know, this old saying, the events connected with the close of human history as we know it, I believe is clearly portrayed in the prophecies. And this is why we're looking at these things, so that we can know the what is coming and the when is coming, so that we can do what we need to do when we need to do it. Not prematurely and not too late. We need to know what is coming before it comes. And we need to be able to be prepared not only spiritually. People think that the only preparation I need to make is spiritually. Well, that's true in the greater picture. But the reality is, if you're spiritually prepared, it will give you the wisdom. That spiritual preparedness will give you the wisdom as to the what you need to do mentally. You need to prepare yourself mentally for what's coming. And once you're prepared physically and mentally for what's coming, you will start preparing physically for what's coming. So it's kind of a snowball effect here. Spiritual preparation first. That's going to get your mind ready for what's coming. And then once your mind is ready, it's going to get your body in gear to prepare and do those things that are going to be necessary for what's coming. Okay, so this is 1 Peter. This is one of my go-to texts. This just, when I first really understood this text, at least as far as I understand it today, I'm sure there's something else I can dig out of here, but how I understand this text is this. Of this salvation, the prophets have inquired and searched carefully who prophesied of the grace that would come to you. So number one, the prophets were searching out the Messiah coming. That's really what this is saying here. That context is totally about the Messiah when we go back and look at this. Peter was really focused on the prophecies of the first coming, which he felt that would be followed rather quickly, it would seem in his own lifetime, that the Messiah would finish the work and set up his kingdom, return the kingdom back to Israel. This is how they thought back then. And so of this salvation, the prophets have inquired and searched carefully. We need to do what the prophets did and inquire and search carefully. If we don't do this, we will be subject to whoever we're listening to. Now, I try and emphasize for people, if they're going to listen to me, they better make sure, spend some time on their own, making sure what I'm saying is actually squaring with what the Word says. You've got to do this. You've got to do this with everyone. And that's why they need to be careful. We need to be careful. And they prophesied of the grace. That was the first coming of the Messiah. We can see 20/20 hindsight. There was two portions of what they were studying. They didn't realize the time frame between the setting up of the kingdom and the grace that came the first time. They were searching what or what matter of time. So they were searching two things, what was coming and the timing of that. I would say that's very important. Like a lot of people just say, oh, it's not important that we study the prophets. It doesn't really matter. All you need to do is know that Jesus loves you and everything will be fine with that. Don't you know God will take care of you? Well, we know that. Those are old cliches, but do we actually understand what that means? God will take care of us. He has taken care of us up until this point, and He will continue to take care of us. But we are to meet with Him. We are supposed to get on His way of thinking. His thoughts are not our thoughts. We're supposed to get on His way of thinking and start understanding what the reason is that He gave these prophecies. So they were looking at what was coming and when it was coming, that the Spirit of Christ, we could talk quite a bit about that, the Spirit of Christ that was in them. So the Spirit of Christ was in them prior to the pouring out of the Holy Spirit. And people say, well, they didn't have the Spirit of Christ. They were saved a different way. I got news for people. No one has ever been saved outside of the Spirit of Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone understood everything at the same time, but it was the Spirit of Christ, or the light of the world, that John says lights every man that comes into the world. So every man has had a portion of the Spirit of Christ that has guided them through their lives, even though they may not have understood who that was or what that was speaking to them through their conscience. And so the Spirit of Christ has been with everyone, but a special measure was with the prophets. Now here's the interesting part. We're told in the time of the end that there would be prophets, there would be women prophets, there would be men prophets. That's what it tells us in Acts chapter 2, which is taken from Joel. So both the Old Testament and the New Testament concur on this point, that in the time of the end, that there would be prophets. That would mean that the Spirit of Christ will be in those people as well. And if I'm reading this right, I'm thinking that the Spirit of Christ that is in those people, that is preparing for them to be of the prophets in the time of the end, they will be focused, don't miss this point, they will be focused on the what is coming and the when it's coming. Are you with me? This is what we can learn from this, is that if we are preparing for the time of the end, and we have a desire to prepare to be amongst God's people, those that are teaching His Word, then we will be studying the same thing that the prophets were studying. And I believe that God will give us special insights as we do this. So it says that the Spirit of Christ was in them, in the prophets, was indicating when he testified beforehand, that's prophecy, so the Spirit of Christ testifies beforehand, the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. And of course, the glories that would follow haven't completely been fulfilled yet. Yes, Yeshua was glorified. Yes, there were people raised at his first coming. We won't get into that now, but there was some glorious things that happened there as well. But the ultimate glories that this is really talking about is the setting up of God's kingdom. And of course, there's a lot of things that involves, but that's really what they were focused on. Habakkuk, then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that he may run who reads it. Now, goes on to say in chapter 2 of Habakkuk, verse 3, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. That's the word moed in there. We don't want to just put that on the shelf. You don't want to forget that, because that's going to come up again. But at the end, it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So there is a little bit of confusion in this text. Number one, the vision that Habakkuk is talking about is for a vision that is for an appointed time. And that can cross the boundary. It's not just a specific time in time, but it could cross the boundary in being a moed or a festival, because the word festival can be substituted in here for the vision for the appointed time. So we know, and we're gonna really flesh this out as we go, we know that there is an appointed time that God fulfills everything. We can see this at the first coming. Yeshua came at the appointed time. He tabernacled among men at the appointed time. He also died at the appointed time. Actually, let's back up just a few days before that. He came into Jerusalem 4 days before the Passover. That was an appointed time. He died at the time of the Passover sacrifice. He also was crucified at the time of the morning sacrifice. He died exactly at the time of not only the Passover sacrifice, but also the appointed time of sacrifice at the close of the day, at the 3 o'clock hour. We call it 3 o'clock hour. At that time, the Bible refers to that as the 9th hour of the day. So he did this so that we would know that how he is working and what calendar. So the what is coming and the when it's coming is seen on the calendar as well. So the prophecies not only contain the what as to the events, but they also contain more than that. They give us timing to those events through the festival calendar. So Yeshua came into Jerusalem at the appointed time, 4 days before Passover. He died at the appointed time as portrayed. He rose at the appointed time, and then he went back to the Father's house. So with that, we can expect that God is functioning on his calendar. That's why we're all studying, what are the appointed times? When are the appointed times? And as I believe, as we keep studying, God is going to filter out all the things that aren't quite true, and we're going to end up with the truth. And he's going to help us all along the way, and it's going to become, I believe, quite obvious, and we'll see that as well. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Now, there's something that has been going on for a long time. It's Yeshua's coming has tarried. Does anyone understand that? Is the disciples were expecting Yeshua to come pretty soon. It doesn't look like they were thinking it was going to be another 2,000 years. Not by what they said, very clearly. By what they said, they thought it could happen within their lifetime. But we can clearly see that his coming has tarried. And Yeshua had some parables on that as well. And so the idea of his tarrying. Well, when we look at that in the Septuagint, we see something very, very interesting. And I find, these tools that we can get a hold of are very helpful. This translation can be had on eSword, and I also have this in book form, the Septuagint, not the APB, Apostolic Polyglot Bible. That's what the APB means. This is taken from the Septuagint, but I also have a copy I was just looking at again this morning. And I'd highly recommend that. Why would I highly recommend that? Well, who cares about the Greek? We only care about the Hebrew. Well, the trouble is we don't have all the New Testament. In fact, I don't even own any books in the New Testament that I could say were written in Hebrew, although there is discussion. Apparently there are copies of those Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament. I don't have any. So the best tool that I have that I can get back into the minds of the prophet in the Old Testament is the Septuagint, because now I have the Greek in the New Testament and also in the Septuagint. This becomes a great tool, and one of the main reasons is the Septuagint was written around 200 to 250 BC, before Yeshua, so they weren't really prejudiced behind Yeshua and sort of manipulated the text to make it look like that this wasn't what it was talking about. Yeshua wasn't what it was talking about. So it was written, if you will, with a bit of a clear mind on trying to get the best translation from the Hebrew into the Greek, because many Jews had become spread all over the known world at that time, and because Greek was the language of the world at that time, they wanted to make sure that the Jews that were being born and losing the language had a translation that they could use. So that's just a brief little summary of that. That's why I believe it's important. Now, when we look at this text, it actually brings a little more out that is quite interesting. It says, and then we read the 1, 2, 3, 4 in this in that order, because the Greek kind of mixes it up a little bit, so it gives it to us in the right order. My Septuagint that I have actually reworks this to put it in the right order, makes it a little easier to read as well. But this is the right, pretty much from the Greek, the way it reads in the order that it reads. So, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision clearly into a writing tablet, so that the one reading these things should take flight. Now that just says it a little bit different, and this word take flight is the word that Yeshua uses many times, almost all the time that Yeshua uses this word in the New Testament. It has to do with persecution. Wow, that's pretty interesting. This word equals the word that Yeshua uses for persecution. So here we go. Write the vision clearly on a tablet, because when persecution comes, we're going to have to flee. And that's what Yeshua said, obviously. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. Now, very interesting, be in the winter. Well, we've just learned a few things this week that when winter comes, and if it's bad, you're in trouble. We have a little diesel generator outside. And when it got to minus 39 below zero, do you know that I took the hose off my diesel tank and I was going to fill my generator with fuel that's inside, has about a 25-gallon inside of a building, so it stays fairly room temperature. But when I tried to put diesel into my generator shed, guess what? No diesel came out, because diesel doesn't flow at minus 35 degrees. You see, there's some preparation that I need to make so that I don't have an emergency in the middle of winter when everything is frozen. Now, where we are currently, if the lights went out and we didn't have power, it wouldn't really matter that much. We have access to water. If we want to have running water, we got to run and get it. So we're not going to die of thirst. We have a little bit of food in our cupboards to get us through for a little while. But the thing that we need most here in Canada is heat. And we are able to heat as long as we have fuel to heat with. And our fuel is either coal or wood. And so as long as you have the absolute necessities, electricity, I'm looking at, that's a luxury for where we are. We're about 30 kilometers, 25 miles, something like that, from the nearest electrical pole. So we don't even have an option to have electricity for we are. So we're getting prepared. We're doing those things that we need to do to make life just a little bit when times get tough, because we're told here that we need to understand, not only understand these visions, but we have to be able to share them in a way that when the possibility of persecution has arrived, then people will be in a position to be able to get through it. And this is what really Habakkuk is talking about. He's talking about a vision that's going to happen when persecution is on its way. For the vision is yet for a time. This is Greek now. This is the same word in the New Testament that's used that can refer to appointed times, which is used as seasons in the New Testament. This is the word that we're going to look at here shortly in the New Testament that is used for seasons or appointed, can be appointed times. This is the same word back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, in the Greek, that is used for the sun and the moon and the stars are for times and seasons, which are appointed times. And we know that the sun, moon, and stars are for not only signs, as we see in the book of Luke. There's going to be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. We're going to see that at the end. So this warning about the sign and the sun, moon, and stars right at the very beginning of time is going to be the same at the end of time. Yeshua told us there would be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, but they will also be for seasons, which are appointed times. So guess what? This is so interesting in my mind. The signs in the sun and the moon and the stars are prophetic signs that we can know something, but there are also times that are contained in those as well. So the signs in the sun and the moon and the stars are for two reasons: the what is coming and the when it's coming. And it's all part and parcel of that. And it shall rise in the end. And the end is the uttermost extremity. That's what it's talking about here. So Habakkuk is talking about events in the time of the end that are appointed, specific appointed times, as in the first coming, so in the second coming. And he says, not in vain it shall rise. So this stuff is not going to be in vain. We're going to get through this if we take the warning. Now, this is the interesting part, how it changes the pronoun. It says, if he should lack or be later, wait for him, for in coming he shall come, and in no way should he delay. Wow, that just really opens this thing up as to the Messiah. Not only because Habakkuk was written well before the Messiah came the first time, but this would apply also to the first coming, which was 4,000 years after the first promise that the Messiah would come. They had to wait for it. It was tarrying. He was tarrying. But certainly at the second coming, 2,000 years after he came the first time, we have been warned here that the prophecies at the time of the end would finally come, and those that they speak about, the Messiah, would finally come as well. But it would seem to tarry, but we wait for it. And that's exactly what Yeshua was pointing to in some of these parables. That one parable, he said, that he would come, the owner of the land would come, and then he would go into a place for a long time and then return for the harvest. And this is really what he's talking about. This long time was an unknown. And this word end here, I just wanted to put this in here, same as 4008, an extremity, end, uttermost part. So the visions of the uttermost part, that's like way down at the end. It's not along the way, although those visions have been applied along the way because they thought they were being fulfilled. However, the visions for the time of the end will not be fulfilled or filled full until the time of the end. The APB in Acts 1, 6, and 7, they indeed having come together. This is a time when Yeshua is just going to be taken up to the Father's house. They're all having a meeting there on Mount of Olives. And it said, they asked him, saying, O Lord, is it in this time you will restore the kingdom of Israel? Even after they had been with him all that time, now he was raised for 40 days with them again. They're still asking the question. That tells me that he never gave them the answer because they're still asking the question. They were still confused on the when. So they went to work in the prophecies, and we can see this in all of them. They were studying the prophecies as to find the when, just the same way we should be studying to find out the what and the when. Goes on to say, and he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or seasons. And this word seasons is the same word that we're dealing with. This is appointed time, so that's God's appointed time, not only of the end, but of the festival fulfillments in these things, which the Father has put in his own authority. Now I want you to notice what it says here, but what it doesn't say. It does not say this. And he said to them, it is not for anyone to know the times or the seasons. Does it say that? No, it doesn't say that. He said it is not for you. That's like 2,000 years ago. He's looking at Peter and John. He says it's not for you to know the signs and the season. But I'm looking at Chuck and Holly, and I can't say that today. I can't say that because it might be for you to know the times and the seasons. Because you lived 2,000 years on this side of when he said that. That's like when he said to the disciples that no one knows the day and the hour. He did not say that no one will never know the day and the hour, or no one will ever know the day and the hour. He didn't say that. He said 2,000 years ago that no one knew the day and the hour. In fact, he went further than that. He said, I don't know it himself as the Messiah. I don't know what the day and the hour is. The angels don't know what the day and the hour, and no man knows the day and the hour, only the Father. Well, I have a question. Is it possible that the Father is going to reveal the day and the hour at a certain point? Yes. The prophecies and the festival calendar are very clear. God will announce the day and the hour. No question about it. We will know ahead of time when he's coming. He's never made that known to any other generation, and he's not going to until the last generation. And that is because we are the generation that must have that information. Okay. APB again, Daniel 8:17. And he came and stood to my position. And in his coming I was distraught, and I fell upon my face, and he said to me, take notice, O Son of Man, for the vision is for the end time. Now, I don't know how you get any clearer in that. That's what he said. The vision is for the end time. So we've got churches and groups doing all kinds of backflips and gymnastics to get to where they want to learn, to get to where they want to land, because their interpretation of Daniel chapter 8 doesn't fit what the angel Gabriel, who was instructed by Yeshua to make Daniel understand the vision. Before he can make him understand the vision, he says something very interesting, and I'm going to paraphrase this. Daniel, before you grapple with what the vision means, you need to understand this point, that the vision is for the time of the end. That's what he said. But when we look in the Greek, the time of the end, that word time is the same word as festival. So the Greek Septuagint that was written prior to Yeshua's coming, a couple hundred years at least, it uses the appointed time word in the Greek to designate when he would come. So if we're grappling with the when of his coming, we can know for sure that whatever the appointed time is that is symbolic or typical of his coming, that's going to be when he comes. So we know right now that he's going to come on an appointed time. No question about that. We've just got to figure out the typology, which is a lot of confusion on the typology, on which feast we're going to pick for when he comes. And so we need to do some serious homework on the typology of the festivals so that we can know the when he's coming. I don't think that's 100% clear yet, but we're working towards that end. Also the same word, time of the end, the appointed time, or the moed of the end, or the extremity, same word, exactly the same word. So we're looking at this vision, that's what he said, that's what Daniel is told. So there has been churches, as I have said, that have tried to put most of this chapter in history, almost like 98% of this chapter in history, but that is in total conflict with what Yeshua told Gabriel to help Daniel understand. This is why I keep saying, go back to the Word, not to the church fathers. You see, if the church fathers, if it wasn't for them to know the times and the seasons, they would have written to that end. But if it is for us to know the times and the seasons, the revelation for us is not going to come until the time of the end. This is why we can't go back to the church fathers. How about we bypass them? This is a radical thought, I know. How about we bypass the church fathers and go straight to the Word? How about that? Anybody want to go there? Can we do that? Let's just go straight back to the Word. Because I believe that the Spirit of Christ that was in the prophets can be, do we trust God in saying through Yeshua that when He, the Spirit of Christ, has come, He will guide us and lead us into all truth and show us things to come? Do we actually trust God at His Word that He said He would put the Spirit of Christ in us? If the Spirit of Christ is in us, that was in the prophets, He should be qualified, I would say He is qualified, to give us the proper interpretation here in the time of the end. And so it really becomes a matter of trust. Who do you trust more? Do you trust the church fathers or leaders more than you trust the Spirit of God? I say no, you cannot do that. For these prophecies that directly tell us that they are for the time of the end, we got to go straight back to the Word and let the Holy Spirit give us the understanding of those things. Goes on to say, Daniel 8:19, and he said, behold, make known to you things being at the last of the wrath. Here again, way down at the end, for it is yet end time. So in case Daniel missed it the first time, 2 verses later, he says, look, get this right. This is all going to be at the end. And here again, he repeats himself in the Greek. It's for an appointed time of the end. Same thing's going on. It's just he's told them the same thing twice. And that means we need to take notice. Very clear. This is what it says. Why can't we take it for just what it says? Then we get up to Daniel 10:14. Daniel 10:14 is part of a larger segment, a repeat and enlargement, if you will. Daniel 10 through 12 is all part of a larger segment, although Daniel 12 actually includes the whole book of Daniel, especially those visions from Daniel 7 through 11. And so that's what we're looking at here. It says, I came to bring understanding to you as much as shall meet your people in last of days. For the vision still is for days. In other words, in the future. That's what it's talking about in most translations, for many days in the future or something like this. And those terms are for could be. In some instances, it's very easy to demonstrate. When it says many days, when it's concerning prophecy, that's thousands of years. That's what it's talking about. And of course, the visions that we're looking at here in Daniel chapter 10 through 12 were written way back preceding 500 BC, that these visions, some of them take in things that are still in the future and will not be ultimately fulfilled until chapter 20 and 21 of Revelation, which is still another 1,000 years out minimum. So some of these visions are for 3,500 years, the fulfillment of all the details, still for 3,500 years in the future. And it doesn't say that because God didn't want to tell Daniel that, because every generation would have lost the imminence. If I tell you that Yeshua's coming is not going to happen for another 2,000 years, okay, well, I better get to work then, right? Well, if I tell you it's now, then you'll get to work, but the work you might be doing might be different than if you thought it would be another 2,000 or 3,000 or 3,500 years, in this case, still in the future. So God is very, very wise on how he has portrayed these prophecies. He's left the time frame in question. The events are there, but the time frame has always been in question. And I say this in times past, that's what he's done. But in now, he is giving us glimpses as to when these things will happen. And that's because I believe they will happen in our generation. Now, an interesting word here, the last here, meet your people in the last, 2078, in the Greek here again, that's what we're looking at. That's where we get the word eschatology. And so we want to know what that word is in here. Let's just drop down to the end of this. The final place or time, ends of or last, latter end, lowest or uttermost. So here again, we're looking at something that's going to be understood for the people in the time of the uttermost, at the end. That's clear. We've seen that in Daniel 7. We've seen that now in Daniel 10. And because Daniel 10 through 12 is all the same context, same vision, we see it again. It's repeated again. I want to just look at this word eschatology coming out of the dictionary. It comes from the Greek word eschatos, meaning last, which makes sense given to this branch of theology is preoccupied with the study of last part of life or death. More specifically, eschatology involves 4 elements: last things, death, judgment, heaven, and hell. So really, it's the fulfillment of God's plan that eschatology deals with. So when we go back into the Septuagint, which was written hundreds of years before Yeshua, it tells us in Daniel 10 that this is talking about the eschatology, the time of when God would bring his plan to an end. And somebody might say, well, it's just talking about death or hell. Well, as soon as you put judgment in there, we know that through Yeshua and other places, the judgment is at the end. So we know for sure judgment's at the end, and heaven or hell. You know, people think you go to heaven and hell when you die. Well, I got some news for them. Spoiler alert, so they say, is the heaven and hell can be lived here on earth in the present. I can live in the presence of glory, in a sense, here because of my understanding. I can accept things the way I do and live in heaven sort of spiritually, not physically, or I can live in hell. If I reject truth, I will be living in hell here and now. This is what people don't understand. And this is just the reality of it. We can live in heaven now, symbolically, or in hell now, symbolically. But ultimately, when we're talking about the end of days, we're talking about whether people will go to heaven or they will go to hell. Now we need to understand what it means to go to hell, hellfire, and all of that. We're not going to get into that now. So Daniel 11, here we have it again. Daniel 11:27. Both these kings, their hearts are for wickedness, and at one table they shall speak lies, and it shall not straighten out. In other words, there's going to be lots of problems, and there's going to be a couple kings that are speaking lies at the same table because they're lying to each other for what they want. And we can see this so clearly today. For the end, same thing, is for a time. Repeat it again. Same thing that he was told in chapter 8. Same thing he was told in chapter 11 or 10. Same thing he was told in chapter 11, which 10 is part of 11. So this is the second time it's been repeated within the same chapter. Goes on in verse 35, just a few verses down the road from 27 in Daniel chapter 11. And the ones perceiving shall weaken, that's God's people, to purify them by fire and to choose. So God is going to allow persecution to come on his people to purify them so that they will choose. What are they going to choose? They're going to choose to go with God no matter what. That's what the purification process in the persecution is for. To get them into either one camp, because some people are going to be in the middle, and we're all in the middle to some degree. We want to get fully on the right side and not fully on the left. In the time of the end, the persecution is to do one thing, and that's to separate, to put people either on one side or on the other. And that's what we see in the Laodicean church, is God is saying, you're not as rich as you think you are, and you need a lot more than what you have. We need to get fully on the right-hand side, and he's going to throw us in the cauldron of persecution, if you will, because he loves us. He wants, when he returns, he wants to actually find faith, those who have lived by faith, and that's what we're going to have to do. It says, goes on to say, and to be uncovered until the time, appointed time of the end. Same words again. So now it's 3 times we've seen in this prophecy that it's reminding us, hey, don't forget, this is at the time of the end. So what should we be doing? We should be going into these prophecies that clearly say they're for the time of the end, and make sure that our forefathers, those that have gone before us, not talking about the prophets now, talking about the church leaders that have gone before us, have actually rightly understood these prophecies. And I would say clearly, as we read more and study more, we can see clearly that they misinterpreted some of these prophecies, not because they were evil, but because it wasn't for them to know. So guess what? They filled in the blanks on some of the things that they maybe shouldn't have filled in the blanks. And I like to tell people, look, if you don't know exactly what something means, just zip your mouth. Just don't make some story up that, oh, this is what it means, because you're going to be found wanting when the actual meaning of the text comes out. And you know, if you're like me, I don't really pleasure in the idea of somebody being able to look at me and, I told you you were wrong. You know, that's just not a comfortable place to be in. So if we're reading scripture and we don't know the meaning of that, or we believe that we're not really sure on that point, then maybe it might be better, if we can, to humble ourselves and say, you know what? I don't exactly know what that means. And that's, I think, part of the humility that we need to display, because we're actually not God. There is one that's God, and he gives the understanding in his timing and not ours. Now we jump forward into Daniel chapter 12. And lo and behold, we see the same thing again. And you, Daniel, obstruct the words and set a seal upon the scroll until the time, moed, that's the Greek word there that's used, moed, of completion. I love that, of completion. Nowhere can we say that God's plan has come to completion. And so this is reminding us again, we're talking about the end here, until many should be taught. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn. and the knowledge be multiplied. And I love this, the way it's used, multiplied here. It's like a flood of light. Those that have gone before us have seen a little bit of light. But I'll tell you what, when God takes the blinders off and he turns on the bright ones, you know, the landing lights for us, the light is going to be so bright that we're getting that many people will be blinded because they can't handle the light. And I would propose the reason why they can't handle the light, because it's different from the light they have been accustomed to using. We can't miss this. Is there's going to be a flood of light for God's people in the time of the end, because all these prophecies are going to be played out as written. Again, 12 verse 9. And he said, "Go, Daniel, for the words are obstructed and sealed until the time," there it is again, "the time of the end, the uttermost extremity and the time appointed." And somebody might say, well, that's just referring to, you know, God has a day and an hour. Yeah, God has a day and an hour, no question about that. But there's going to be an appointed time or a festival that's connected, as in the first coming, so in the second coming. The second coming is a lot more important for us to understand the typology in the festival calendar than it was in the first coming. And let me explain why it's so much important. If you didn't believe that Yeshua was the Messiah when he was hanging on the cross, you still had your lifetime to sort that out. But I propose the idea that you're going to have some kind of extended probationary period after Yeshua comes. That is a fabrication of the devil, because he doesn't want you to understand that when Yeshua returns, it is over. All decisions for eternity have been made. So there's different theologies that are contained in different churches. One is the rapture theory, so I still get a second chance. When I see somebody raptured, that's just a second chance theory. For those that want to love the world a little bit longer, they're going to wait till their buddy is raptured and then they'll get serious. That's putting off what you should do today. The other rapture theory that I'm well acquainted with, is that I'm going to do what I need to do, you know, maybe get out of town, when Sunday laws come. That's just another form of the rapture theory. That's so that I can put off what I should do today to tomorrow. I'll tell you what, when Sunday laws come, it is too late. We're talking can't buy, can't sell, all of that stuff. So if anyone's waiting for Sunday laws, that's an instrument, that's a tool of the devil to keep people asleep until the Sunday laws come. It's too late when the Sunday laws come, if you're from that persuasion, and that's where I come from. I believe Sunday laws will come, but I believe if you're planning on getting out of town into a safe place, a wilderness setting, as the prophecies of Revelation indicate, where God's people will be, if you're looking at to get out of town and into a safe place, waiting for Sunday laws, it will be too late. You will be trapped in of the city where you live. In fact, you won't even be able to sell. My Bible says you won't be able to buy or sell. You will become a criminal of the state. And so you're either going to accept the mark of the beast and be able to buy or sell, or you're going to be of God's people. And at that time, you will lose everything that you have if you're going to remain faithful. And you will flee, if you decide to do that, with whatever is on your back. And the last time I looked, Yeshua spoke about the time of Lot. When Lot had to get out of town, when he dilly-dallied around in town, he ended up sleeping in a cave. Now, I don't know, that just doesn't sound good. And he lost not only his wife, but he lost a couple other daughters and the sons-in-laws. I don't know if they had any children. But he lost family because he dilly-dallied around. These are sobering ideas that we need to look at. Okay, so there's all kind of the preface. The reason why we're looking at the little horn, because the little horn has not been fulfilled in the time of the past. There are some things we can learn from those that have gone before us, but the fulfillments are not what we can learn. What about this little horn? Little horn in Daniel chapter 7 first pops up very clearly. Daniel chapter 8. He also comes up in Daniel chapter 8. Some people have the idea, well, it's a different little horn in Daniel chapter 7 as it is in Daniel 8. No, it is not. Very clearly, no, it is not. It is the same little horn. God is doing a repeat and enlargement. Different details are given in chapter 8 that you don't get in chapter 7. This is why we need to put as many prophecies on top of each other. We need to layer these prophecies on top of each other so we can get different details and fill in the gaps. Guess what? In Daniel 7, we have a time frame that involves a little horn. Well, no different. We have a time frame in chapter 8 that has to do with the events connected with the little horn. Same thing. Different time period, different length of time. So we can see this as we add these prophecies together, we're going to get a more complete view of actually what's going on. We see glimpses, just faint glimpses of the little horn power in Daniel chapter 9, but we really need to read between the lines to see that. And we can do that once we understand the other prophecies, what they're saying. I believe in Daniel chapter 9 we can see glimpses of this little horn power that will come to power in its time. But clearly we see in Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 12, and Daniel chapter 11 is included in this because it's all the same sequence of the prophecy. But Daniel chapter 10 is the introduction to Daniel chapter 11, which is the vision proper. Daniel 12 is primarily, not all of it, because in Daniel chapter 1 and 2 talks about the time of the end in the time of the resurrection when Michael stands up, the great prince. So that's actually part of the vision. So the interpretation doesn't actually happen till a couple verses into Daniel chapter 12. But Daniel chapter 12 is the interpretation, very brief interpretation, but it's mostly to do with the persecution of God's people and the time frames that are involved. The time frames that are involved in chapter 12 are a time times and a half, which we don't see in Daniel chapter 11. So Daniel's told that the book is sealed up, not just the vision of Daniel 10 through 11, but the book is sealed up. So we need to find out, okay, well, where is the book? Where is the chapter that contains the time times and a half? Well, we got to go back to Daniel 7 and we see the time times and a half. So apparently, according to Yeshua and Gabriel, that the vision of the time times and a half is not going to be unsealed until the very extremity, the appointed time of the end. Daniel chapter 12 goes on with another time frame, and that's from the time that the daily is taken away, and that's 1290, and the abomination of desolation set up. So the daily is taken away and the abomination is set up are bookends, if you will, and there's 1290 day period behind or between those two bookends. Also the 1335 that Daniel's told he would rise to his inheritance at the end of days. Well, the last day that's mentioned at the extremity in this chapter is day 1335. So we can interpret safely, I believe, interpret the 1335 as the resurrection. Now we just need to figure out when that starts. And when that time frame starts, we're going to know how long it is until the resurrection. And to me, that's the love of God. Because if we actually understand the absolute, what's a good word? I'm just going to use a simple word that we can all understand. The absolute destructive forces that are manifesting themselves, the evil destructive forces in the time of the end that are manifesting itself and persecuting God's people, he has contained in his word given us the how long this will happen for. To me, That is a loving parent that not only warns them of the what's coming, but the how long it will come for. Now, when we get to Revelation chapter 6, we can see the little horn, not called the little horn, but it's in different symbols. But we can find within the symbols contained in Revelation chapter 6, we see the little horn. We see the little horn also in chapter 12, although it's not, Revelation chapter 12, although it's not called the little horn, but we can see the little horn present when we start to look at some of the other prophecies and blend them with chapter 12. The other prophecy, we can see the little horn quite clearly, could be disputed as to the clarity of it. I think it's very clear. We can see the little horn manifesting itself in the mouth that speaks great things, exactly the same wording as we're going to see from Daniel chapter 7. The little horn, it says, speaks great things. And we see a mouth speaking great things also in Revelation 13. I believe the phraseology is so close that once we start examining what it's saying, we are definitely talking about the same prophetic period that these visions are in. Revelation 14, we can see the little horn in Revelation 14 very, very clearly. Also in Revelation 17, and as we are noting here in Revelation 17, the little horn is not the mouth speaking great things. That's not what it's called. It morphs itself into a harlot, and we're going to be looking at that. And that's where we have this comment come in. Isn't the harlot Jerusalem? Well, the little horn's destiny is Jerusalem. As we're going to be looking at these prophecies, very clearly, the little horn power has its eyes set on where it wants to reside, and that's the city of the great king. There's no coincidence of that. It wants to represent God on earth. So where should it represent everyone on earth? That's the city of the great king. So the great king at that time, the one ruling over the kingdoms of the earth, will be the little horn, which is described as being a harlot in Revelation. We're going to look at why it's described as being a harlot. Very clear as to why it is called the harlot. And it is going to be reigning from Jerusalem. So is Jerusalem the harlot? Yes, the harlot reigns from Jerusalem. So it's almost one in the same. And as we look back in the Old Testament, we can see that Israel was deemed as being a harlot, and Jerusalem being the center point for that. But I would propose that the reason why Jerusalem was considered a harlot in the Old Testament was because of those that ruled over Jerusalem had fully apostatized from God in their thinking, which really made the harlot reside in Jerusalem, which really meant that Jerusalem had become corrupt as the harlot has been corrupted as well. So they're really looked at almost like one and the same. Revelation 18, we see the harlot, the judgment on the great harlot as well. Revelation 19, very interesting, I've listed this. Revelation 19 is the second coming, but we do not see the harlot destroyed at the second coming. We see the beast destroyed. We see the kings of the earth destroyed, which make up the beast. We see them destroyed. We see the false prophet of Revelation 13. So we see the beast of Revelation 13 destroyed. And we see the harlot we see the second beast of Revelation 13 destroyed. Those are the two we see destroyed. But we don't see the harlot destroyed in Revelation 19 at the second coming. And that's because the kings of the earth, as we're going to see, have already destroyed the harlot. This harlot, that system of governance, that religious political system, came to an end prior to the second coming. And so we can see that that system ends before. For those that believe that the beast of Revelation is the papacy, they don't seem to understand that they can't call the harlot who rides the beast, which is made up of peoples, tongues, and nations, That's talking about the whole earth. The beast is made up of the whole earth of peoples and languages that is governed by the kings of the earth, the 10 kings, as we're going to be looking at. And the harlot is pulling the strings, or is in control of the reins, is directing the kings of the earth. And that's the way it's portrayed. That's why we need to go back to the prophecies and see exactly what the prophecies and the prophets and ultimately God is trying to tell us here in the time of the end. So let's go back to Daniel. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. And he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. And here again, it's too bad we don't have all the facts, but when God adds to these facts that we see here, we can see more facts in the different prophecies. The prophecies that I just laid out to you, when we combine all those prophecies together, we can see all the facts that we need to get through this time. We're going to see more data, more information, and we're going to be able to paint this picture to what it's supposed to look like in the time of the end, because we're pulling in all the main things in the time of the end. This is why it's so dangerous for people to take an isolated prophecy where they're looking at Babylon, the great, the harlot, is Jerusalem. If you just isolate that, yes, it does look like that. But when you take the bigger picture, take more data into it, yes, Babylon, as in the harlot, plays a great part. But we have a person that is represented there in Babylon, and a person in a place come together and make it all Babylon. Not only the leader of it, but also the place becomes Babylon, or confusion as well. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. Now I've just stuck in here, the sea represents peoples, multitudes, nations, tongues, and we don't see that until Revelation, but I want to draw that in because it actually makes this thing make way more sense. We don't have to start guessing. So the sister prophecies from Revelation, we can pull those down in, some of the meanings here, and we can see what it's talking about. So the 4 winds of heaven strove, or there's great strife among the sea of people. Now I just saw an article this morning that popped up on my computer talking about civil war in the United States. There are people both on the left and the right that are seriously talking about civil war. This idea is ripening in the United States. Now, when we parallel this with prophecy, we can see clearly that when Yeshua was asked what will be the signs of your coming in the end of the age, the first thing he talks about deception. Okay, so the first thing we need to be aware of deception. It's going to be rampant, even amongst who we think are God's people. And then he says you'll see wars and rumors of wars. Be not troubled, for all these things must happen first. That's Matthew, but when we get to Luke, he says wars and commotions. And I was reading in the Aramaic translation, it says for commotions, revolutions. Revolutions are something that happens within countries. They're not nation against nation. They're things that happen within countries. These are the things that are going to happen first, is rumors of wars and commotions within countries. We can see this very clearly even within our own countries, that we are moving towards civil unrest in our own countries. And I believe if we don't see civil unrest in both Canada and the United States and in Europe, many countries now, even Germany and these larger countries that are controlling the European Union, there's becoming very much civil unrest, and it's primarily because of the immigrants that they've been allowing into their countries. With these immigrants comes terrorism, and this is what's going to be bring most of this strife. We can see this coming beforehand. We don't have to guess here. It says 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from each other. The first, it says, had a lion with eagle's wings. The eagle's wings were plucked off, and it was made to stand on its own 2 feet like a man. We're going to see here very clearly what do these beasts represent. We don't have to guess. It tells us they're kingdoms that come up. So I would propose we have a lion kingdom, we have an eagle kingdom, and they're together, but when the eagle's wings are plucked off, what actually held the lion up to make it as strong as it was is because of the eagle. When the eagle is plucked off, when the eagle goes down, when the eagle kingdom goes down, the lion is going to have to stand on its own 2 feet, just what we are told. The second was a bear with 3 ribs, rise and devour much flesh. It says, they said thus unto it. Who are the they? I don't know who said this, but the prophecy says, they said, arise and devour much flesh. So evidently, according to the prophecy, we've got a hungry bear in the time of the end. Can we see a hungry bear out there? I'll let you guess on that. A lot of blood flying over there in eastern Ukraine. We've got a bear that is hungry. And then we have a leopard with 4 heads, 4 wings, and dominion, it says, is given to it. This is none of the other kingdoms said dominion was given to it. And this goes with, and we're going to see this very clearly, this is something that I've always kind of known, but I never really had it solidly nailed down. And this is what I found this week that I wanted to share with everyone, is the idea is that those that have gone before us have looked at these prophecies, look at these kingdoms as successive kingdoms. And they've said, well, the lion is a kingdom, and then after that kingdom came a bear, and then after that kingdom came a leopard, and then after that kingdom came a dreadful beast. And so it's always after in time, instead of the concept that they're all contemporaries, all functioning at one time on the earth when this great strife in the world is happening. And I propose that it is the latter. It is at the time of the end, we're going to have these 4 great kingdoms striving for supremacy in the time of the end. But it says of the third one, that dominion is given to it. That's very interesting, because I would propose that this is the leopard, and the leopard is China. And so that after the eagle's wings are plucked off the lion, the eagle goes down, dominion, world dominion, will be given to the leopard. That's a scary idea, isn't it? But that's what the prophecy says. It doesn't say that dominion was given to the bear. No, it doesn't, because the bear doesn't get dominion. But if we're looking at dominion as in Medo-Persia in times past, prior to Yeshua's coming, that would mean that dominion would be given to the bear as well. But it doesn't say that, because it wasn't in this context of the time of the end. They're all functioning in the world, on the world stage at the same time. And the leopard is the one that gets dominion when the eagle goes down. And we can see that. That's pretty clear right now. If the United States lost its power, or should I say, because the United States has lost its power, who's number 1 in the world? I'll let you guess that one. But I do believe that it's not over yet, and we're going to see America made great again. The next one tells us the 4th beast, dreadful, has 10 horns. A little horn persecutes and devours the whole earth. So the little horn in the time of the end is going to devour the whole earth. So we have a stage thing going on. So we have the eagle's wings being broken. We have a bear coming along and starting to devour much flesh. And I would suggest that's because the eagle's been broken. Now the bear can do whatever it wants. It's doing a little bit of that now. But with the United States out of the picture, it will do whatever it wants. Anybody been listening to the news? 5 NATO countries have been just put on notice that they've got to brace for war with Russia. In fact, one article said in Poland, Poland has just announced, if there is a call to arms, then you have 6 hours to show up to get your gear on. So they are, and they're not going to say that unless there's an imminent threat for war. We can see very clearly that the bear is going to get very hungry when the United States or the eagle goes down. And then what will follow that? The third beast will gain control over the earth. There's no disputing that. China will take in its satellite nations, Taiwan included. I don't know how long it's going to be before that. But they will take in all the East Asia countries that the United States will lose influence over when it goes down. And their empire will become very great. And they will be the #1 superpower on the earth. But it says that the fourth beast that's dreadful has 10 horns made up of many kings, and it has a little horn that persecutes. So the persecution of God's people starts in this empire. I would suggest that this empire is the European Union that's made up of many kingdoms. And it says when the little horn gets power and rules over this empire, it will devour, in other words, it will include within its kingdom the whole earth. In other words, the little horn will gain power over the whole world. So will China still be a power? Yes, China will still be a power. But the little horn will rule over all. The little horn's destiny, as we're going to see in these prophecies, will become Jerusalem. That's its long held Jerusalem as its property. And it will end up in Jerusalem and rule over the whole earth as the counterfeit Messiah that is still to come. When he comes on stream, still to come, he will rule over all the earth at that time. So in Daniel 2, we see Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, 10 kingdoms. People say, well, you can't change that. That's the foundation for the whole book of Daniel. Well, I would suggest that if we read this again and we start to study it again, we're going to see something very interesting. That while, yes, Nebuchadnezzar thought he could live forever, eternally, live on even after he died, because that's what they believed, and his kingdom would last forever and ever. The Babylon kingdom would last forever and ever. Well, he had a dream one night that troubled him greatly. And lo and behold, Daniel, you know the story, Daniel came along and interpreted the dream. That God gave him the interpretation of what was not his dream, but someone else's dream. And it was to straighten Nebuchadnezzar out to make him understand that he was not God. There was another God, and it was Daniel's God. This whole thing was in the purpose of putting Nebuchadnezzar in his place. And he was told that after his kingdom, another kingdom. Then after that kingdom, there would be another kingdom. Then after that kingdom, there would be another kingdom. And then at the end, prior to Yeshua's second coming, there would be an attempt to bring the world under a one world government or a new world system, that there would be one head. And lo and behold, as we get further into these prophecies, we can see who that head is, and we can start to know who those kingdoms are. But that's at the time of the end. So what Nebuchadnezzar was shown is all the attempts to rule the world at that time. Now, there has been other attempts to rule the then known world, but none of them lasted for very long. These ones were hundreds of years where they reigned, starting from the time of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, his kingdom. And there were successive dominant world kingdoms all the way along. And then when Rome broke up, we know what happened then. There was attempts all the way along from Rome to bring the known world together under one head. And we've seen the most recent one that we've seen a little bit back in history would be Hitler. His idea was to rule, make one race, one superior race. Where have we seen that discussed? Maybe Davos? Yeah, we see today that there is a group of people that wants to make a superior race and blend AI with human beings and move the evolutionary process just a little bit further down the road. You guys are aware of all of this, I think. Yes, there is an attempt. However, the conservative population sees in this a threat. What do they see in this a threat? Well, the conservative population, for the most part, adheres to biblical principles and biblical teachings, and they see in this movement what's called the mark of the beast. All of this stuff is setting up for a one world order, which people are reading that it's the mark of the beast. Well, the conservative movement is going to oppose this on a world stage, and this attempt right now to bring the world under one governance is going to fail, just as Hitler's was failing, and those that have gone before him, Napoleon and so on, all these other ones that attempted to bring in the New World Order, they failed because God would not allow it to happen. God is not going to allow the Bill Gates of the world to get control and do all of his mischief, and all those that are with him. They're not going to be able to do this. It's going to stop because God's word is going to prevail. Now, once God's word prevails and the religious people get in control of the world's government, the pendulum is going to go from this side all the way to this side. So it's going to swing from one end of the pendulum to the other. And when it goes from this side and it's swinging through, so what we're seeing right now in this attempt for a new world order, it's losing power over the people now. It's coming down and it's going to hit the center point, which becomes the fastest moving point on the pendulum. That's the point that we're going to get to, and it's going to swing up and go up to the other side, which will have the conservatives in the ruling power of the earth, and they will legislate their form of righteousness, and that's where the little horn comes in. To make it clear, in order for people to be expecting the Messiah to return in the time of the end, the little horn power is a religious figure that believes the Bible is true, except they don't understand the proper meaning, or they've twisted the words of Scripture to make people think that the Messiah is returning to do a certain thing on the earth, when in fact he's not coming to do that. So this misconception about the Messiah's coming and what's going to happen after that is going to play the focal point of the deception that's coming on the earth. So, sum it up again. What we're going to see right now, or what we're seeing right now in Davos, is not going to be the end of all things. There's going to be a swing back into the conservative side, but when the conservative side gets its full power, they will legislate religious laws that are according to their understanding of the Bible. So we've been told here by the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 what the two things it's going to do, which we're going to look at. They're going to change times and laws. So we can expect a power to bring in what it believes to be the times and laws that all people should be worshiping under. And that's where the little horn comes in. So we want to really unpack this so that we can all get this, not only so that we can understand it ourselves, so that when we share it with others, as Habakkuk was told, write it down, make it plain, so that he who reads it, when the persecution comes or when it's coming, will be able to flee and get to safety. I propose very strongly, I am completely convinced I've only been studying these prophecies for over 35 years, actually over 40 years. I am convinced, just because I've been studying for that long doesn't mean I'm right, but through that study, I'm convinced that Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 10 through 12, Revelation 6, 12, 13, 17, and 19 are all in the 10 kingdoms, all in the feet, all in the last attempt for a one world system which will usher in to what they're going to think is the second coming of the Messiah. It'll be the second coming of their Messiah. And that's where these prophecies belong. Although they've been paralleled, and a read of them would indicate there's a possibility, but we're going to see very clearly that when we read these prophecies with a little bit of research and understanding, we can see clearly that these prophecies are for the time of the end. And the kingdoms that are mentioned, these beasts, are contemporaries, and we're going to see that. I want to make that crystal clear today, because that makes it different than what those have been gone before us to understand. Daniel 7:17, very clear. Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. No guessing at what the beasts represent. They are kingdoms. Now the question is, are they successive kingdoms or not? That's what we need to know. Do they parallel Daniel chapter 2, or are they all contemporaries? Well, I would suggest they're all contemporaries, and they're pictured in the UN. The great beasts of the earth are the permanent members of the Security Council. The beast actually is the UN that's made up of the kings of the earth, but there's 10 primary kingdoms of the earth. And we can see the forerunners of this. We see China, we see France, we see Russia, we see Great Britain, and we see the United States. These are represented, I believe, in the animals. And Great Britain with the United States would be the lion and the eagle functioning together. So when we overlay this on a map, I can do it like this. We see the eagle as in the United States, Great Britain as the lion with the eagle's wings right now. And we can see this. I don't think there's any argument that the United States and the eagle are even today working together. Over in the Red Sea, they've been skirmishing with the Arabs in Yemen. And it's been primarily Great Britain and the United States that have been working really closely together to do what they're doing over there. We've seen this in history. It's really not even disputed. And then we see the bear in Russia, the leopard in China, and it will embrace other countries as well. And then the European Union, because default says this, and that's where the little horn comes out of, is the European Union, and he comes out of the fourth beast. The fourth beast that's dreadful and terrible, where persecution actually begins. That's where it begins. And we should expect that, because Rome has not changed its tactics. They will do away with anyone that will not give them their authority that they think is due to them. We've seen this in the Dark Ages. They've already run a show for us so that when they get the power back that they demand, they will do exactly. The persecution of times past will be renewed. And all those torture chambers and all these things to get people to do what they want them to do, I believe they will use those again in the time of the end. There is no depth to the depravity that the human heart will go when it ultimately wants ultimate power. And this is what we're going to see when the devil gets full control of his tools on the earth. So we see the United Kingdom as the lion, Russia the bear, China the leopard, and the mark of the beast will come on stream in the European Union first, and that's the dreadful beast, the Catholic or the Universal Church, the little horn, who is the harlot. That's what we're looking at. It's very interesting that the eagle's wings are plucked off the lion, and then we go to Revelation and we see something else that's very interesting, which we're not going to cover now, but just a little glimpse here. The dreadful beast that is shown in Daniel that has 10 horns, 3 are uprooted, and there's a little horn that comes on stream. This dreadful beast actually morphs into, in Revelation chapter 12, we see the disappearance of the eagle, but we see the dreadful beast turns into a dragon with, yes, 7 heads. How many horns did the beast have from Revelation 7? It had 10. 3 were uprooted, and it had 7 at the end with a little horn coming on stream. And I would suggest that as we go further in the prophecies, we're going to see what the little horn morphs into the harlot, and she actually rides the beast of Revelation 12 and then takes full control. It says it devours the whole earth. It takes in all of these other nations as the final authority on the planet. That is what we're looking at in the future. And it's one thing to say if this was 50 years or 100 years in the future, it would be our children's problem or our children's children's problem or our children's 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 problem. But I believe God has given us the understanding of these visions because we, unless we're hit by a bus or something else bad happens to us, we are going to see these prophecies come to fruition. And that's how I know that we've come to the end, because the understanding of these visions is being made now. So we see in Revelation, or in Daniel chapter 7 and 8, Revelation 12, Revelation 13, verse 8, the mouth speaking great things, Revelation 17, we can see that the little horn has a change in the symbol, but it's the same entity all the way through. Daniel 7:7. After this I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. Okay, let's look at this now. It was different from the beast that before it. If I said to you, you know, I'm going to go to town, but before I go to town, I'm going to do this or that. You're thinking of before means time, right? That's what we think of when somebody says before something. We're thinking of time, but before can also mean in front of, as in the presence of. When we look at that word, I decided, you know, I've got to look at that word before because there's something weird about that word. I looked at that word, and lo and behold, it means before as in the presence of. Here's our first clue as to what's going on. So this beast is different from all those beasts that were before it. It's not saying these other beasts were before it in time. It's saying in the presence of. So what it's saying here, it's telling us something, that the fourth beast is living and alive and well, and the 10 horns and the little horn are alive at the same time that the lion is alive, same time that the bear is alive, and the same time as the leopard is alive. This is why we need to go back and have a second look to find out if those that have gone before us are right. The meaning of the word here is in the presence of. It was different from all the beasts that were in its presence. That's what it should say. But it's been translated, and we know we can use that word. If I go before something, I can be before it. I'm before the camera right now. It doesn't mean that the camera's gone out in front of me, as in time, but I'm standing in front of the camera, so I am before the camera.
Right before your very eyes.
Yeah, right before, Judy says, right before your very eyes. We say that all the time. That's in the presence of. That's at the same time. This is what the word means. And so I started checking this out, and lo and behold, Daniel 4, 6, and 8. And I'm not going to take the time. I don't want to take the time. I will look up one of these to be sure. But Daniel is written in Aramaic, so we can't really go back in Aramaic and see this, but we can check it in other ways. Daniel 4, 6, 8. That's when Daniel's called to go in before Nebuchadnezzar, not in time, but in his presence. This is how Daniel used the word. All the way through Daniel that he uses this word, it's in the presence of. Ezra is no different, and I want to look at that. Just grab your Bibles and have a look at it. Now, Ezra, there's Ezra, part of the book of Ezra is written in Hebrew. This part, lo and behold, was written in Aramaic. Same thing, Chaldean, ancient Chaldean, same as Daniel. 4:18, Ezra's reading, it says in verse 17, then the king sent an answer, and then it goes on to say, the letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me. Not in time, but in place. So when it's used in the Aramaic, and there's not a lot of use of the Aramaic in the Old Testament, so what it's used for, and these other verses in Ezra, same thing, it's in front of or in the presence of. So now when we read Daniel 7, every time it says that, and we're going to look at this in Daniel chapter 7, verse 7 is what we just read. We're going to see this in verse 8. We're going to see it in 10. We're going to see it in 13. And we're going to also see it in verse 20. So every time now we're going to see that, it means the word before means in the presence of. So let's look at that. I was considering the horns, and behold, there came up among them a little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Here's our first challenge here. So it says there was 10 horns. 10 horns on this beast. And then there was a little horn. And then before the little horn, 3 were plucked up. So what is it saying here? There was 10, and in the presence of, before whom, in the presence of the little horn, 3 were plucked up. Okay, here's the first problem. And I am not picking on just one church, because all churches have this messed up. Okay, so don't get me wrong here. There is the idea that in 538 AD, the little horn came on power, kids, when it rained, and it ended in 1798. Okay, so that's the times and a half. They've changed the days into years. Done some pretty good gymnastics. It looks good on the surface, but when we start to dig down, we can see it's not talking about years here. It's talking about times and a half, which is 3.5 years, and you don't take those days in the 3.5 years and turn them into all these years. And there's a lot of problems with that. We're not going to get into that right now. The point being is that the 10 horns, the interpretation of this, okay, the interpretation of this is before the 3.5, before the little horn came on stage and got its power, 3 of them were uprooted. In fact, it says, this is the interpretation of what these people are saying, 3 are uprooted, and from here on in, we only have 7. So from the time that the little horn is reigning in 538, in this historical application, there are only 7. But the prophecy says, actually, when the little horn comes up and gains power, there should be 10. And it's the little horn's doing that uproots the 3, and then we end up with 7. That's actually what the prophecy says. And so we don't get that understanding, and so we start going back and start seeing what it actually says. And that's what we need to do. We need to see what it says. So when the little horn comes into power, it's the one that uproots these horns from their position. So now we move on to Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, very next verse. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. This is where we talked about the mouth speaking great things. We can see that in Revelation 13. Same entity as well. But what we want to look at here is this word before. So we see this word before, again, as we just mentioned, So it's the second time talking about the 10 horns again, but it gives us a little difference. So we see a little horn comes up, before whom three, not before in time, but in the presence of, three of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes of a man. So in the presence of. So it has to be, if we're saying that the little horn reigns at a certain time in Earth's history, then the uprooting of the three has to happen during the time that the little horn has power. And this word, great things, again, is from the Chaldean. This great things, it means huge, domineering in character, very great things. So whatever this little horn is doing, it's wonderful things. And I would propose that once we get to the book of Revelation, we're going to see what those wonderful things are. And the wonderful things are, it has the recipe for world peace. And just after a massive world war, it will have the recipe for world peace. And this is how its system, if the world adopts their system, we will have world peace. And that's what we would expect from a Christian organization, wouldn't we? If we would just do it their way, we would have world peace. These are the great things, part of the great things that it's talking about. We move on in verse 9 and 10. And I beheld till thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days stood seated, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, and his wheels a burning fire. So we see here, while the little horn is speaking, we have judgment come on stream. And a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, same word, before him. Is this before in time, the Ancient of Days, we have fire coming out? Or is this in the presence of the Ancient of Days? You see, Daniel was well familiar with what this word meant, and it was in the presence of. So when it says that the beast that was before it, it really means in the presence of. Clearly, these beasts are all on the world stage at the same time. And then it goes on to say, and 10,000s of 10,000s stood before him, or in the presence of the Father. And judgment was set, and the books were open, and I beheld, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Let's just think about this for a minute. The reason why I'm doing this is not to belittle anyone's understanding. It's so that we can know what we have isn't complete. And it's not until I go to the bank and I want to make a withdrawal for what I have, what I think I have in the bank. And the bank says, no, sorry, you can't withdraw that much from the bank because you don't have that much in the bank. And this is kind of what we have. We have these prophecies so that we can know what's coming, we can prepare for what's coming. If we don't understand these prophecies, we won't be able to mentally, physically, spiritually prepare for what's coming because the prophecies tell us what's coming. If we don't invest in our future according to what the prophecies tell us to do, and when I talk about investment, I'm talking about all ways. I'm talking about spiritually, mentally, and physically. If the prophecies are there so that we invest in our future so that we can get through to the other side, if we don't see the prophecies as future and we think it's all in the past, we won't have anything in the bank to withdraw when they actually happen. So I believe these prophecies are ultimately super important for us to understand. That's why I'm doing this. But what I'm trying to show people is there's a good chance, as where I was, that I actually didn't understand these prophecies, and I wasn't in a good position when the prophecies were going to happen because they told me what the preparation I had to make, both spiritual, or in a triple sense, spiritual, mental, and physical. And because I started making the preparation, I'm getting myself into the place where I need to be when these things happen. But if I don't realize that I'm bankrupt and I don't understand these prophecies, haven't invested in my future, then when the future comes and it becomes present, I'm going to be bankrupt, and there's a good chance that I might fall by the wayside because I didn't understand what God was doing and allowing to happen. So here we go. We have 538 as some of you AD, when the little horn came on stream, and then we've been told 1798 is when the little horn was taken out, and we're going to see this. This is very, very important. And we still have 10 horns. 3 are taken out during the time. This is what it actually says, not what we've been told. We've been told that 3 were taken out prior to this, but the prophecy indicates they're during this. Also says, during the time that the little horn is speaking, judgment is set. We know that because verse 8 and verse 11 of chapter 7 are couched, or sorry, I should be saying verse 9 and 10 are couched within the time frame of the little horn is speaking, which has to be here. And the judgment happens, a lot of people believe, the judgments began in 1844. This cannot be true as we read the prophecies, because it indicates that the judgment during this time when the little horn is reigning from 538, this judgment period that they say happened out here about 50 years later should have actually happened during the time that the little horn is speaking. This is what a careful read, this is what going back to the prophecies, this is why the church, we cannot trust what the church fathers got us as far as information, not because they were evil, but because it wasn't for them to know the times or the seasons that the Father has put in his own authority. But here at the time of the end, he's revealing the times and the seasons, and so these prophecies are starting to open up. So this is another inconsistency, and as we're going to see, there's another place where it says that the little horn is destroyed to the end. He gets this times and a half, and he's destroyed forever at the end. And we can see clearly that the little horn power in the papacy has not been destroyed forever, and he is going to have a resurgence of power. And they say, oh, well, that's what Revelation 13 is all about. Well, we're going to get there. We're going to get to Revelation 13, but we're looking at Daniel now. So we're going to look at a few more verses, if you can just hang on for a little bit of overtime here, just to get to the end of Daniel chapter 7, because we want to do that today. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. This, to me, cinches the deal. At the time that the little horn is destroyed, at the end of the 1260-day period, or the end of the times and a half, 42 months, whatever time period you want to choose, they're all pointing to the same thing. At the end of the little horn's reign, it is destroyed. The only time that God would allow this power to be destroyed, that's the executive phase of judgment. That would have to mean that there would have been a judgment prior to the executive phase, which happens at the end of the times and a half. So here again, the judgment had to happen during the time of the reign of the little horn, and then the executive phase in the destruction of the little horn. And it goes on to say, at the destruction of the little horn, the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion. In other words, their kingdom was taken away. When? Not 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 2,500 years ago, but when the little horn is destroyed, they lose their kingdom. They lose their sovereignty at that point. But they live on. Why do they live on? Well, the prophecies tell us why they live on. It's the 10 kings, it's the rest of the beasts that actually destroyed the harlot. We don't see that until we get to Revelation 13, but very clearly the reason why those beasts are alive, they are before each other, they are contemporaries of each other, they operate in the presence of each other, because they are the ones that execute judgment on the little horn. So they're obviously still alive in the time of the end. This is so clear when we actually open up our minds to see what it says. I was watching in the night vision, so we're moving on in verse 13 and 14 of Daniel chapter 7. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Same word again. In the presence of the Ancient of Days. Yeshua was brought into the presence. That's the way the word is used all the time. Then to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not not pass away. His kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. That's good news. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to the one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts which are four kings which shall rise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. So all this bad news is not so bad when we consider that once we get through the bad news, we're going to possess the kingdom forever. So in that sense, we want the bad news to happen so that we can get on the other side of the bad news instead of looking ahead at it. We want to be looking back at it. And the only way we can look back at it is if we've gone through it. Daniel 7:19 through 20 goes on to say, Then I would know the truth about the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and trampled or stamped the residue with his feet. And the 10 horns that were in its head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell. Again, that's the verse we looked at earlier. Even that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than its fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints, and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made until in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Wow, there's so much in these prophecies. It's amazing. So the horn was making war against the saints. That's why Daniel focused in on the little horn, because he was the one that was the primary instigator of persecuting God's people, getting rid of God's people, this cleansing of the earth, this ethnic type cleansing of the earth, to bring in his own system and get rid of God's system. And he does it through persecuting God's people. He does this, it says, until the Ancient of Days came and a judgment was made in favor of the saints. So here we go again. So the persecution of God's people during the time of the little horn, it says until judgment. So that would mean that how do we get judgment outside of the time? Because the persecution of the little horn happens only until 1798. That would have to mean, again, doubling down, that judgment would have to happen during the time of the little horn's reign. And once the decision of judgment is made, then as we get into the further prophecies, is God puts it in the heart. This is in Revelation 17, verse 16 and 17. Revelation 17, verse 16 and 17. This is when God puts it in the hearts of these kings to destroy the harlot, because they finally realize that the harlot is only in it for herself. Now I want to look at something very interesting. You notice that in favor of the saints of the Most High has been put in there. It's in italics. It could mean, and a judgment was made of the saints of the Most High. You know, that could mean something a little bit different. Here's a little different translation. I believe this is the King James. I beheld, in the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Wow, this is amazing now. Okay, so this could be one of two things here. This could be that judgment is made in favor of, although it doesn't actually say that in the Aramaic. It reads more like the judgment is given to the saints. In other words, the judgment is given, or the saints do the judgment. Wow, that brings on a whole new thing when we get into the New Testament, where Paul says, do you not know that you will judge the world and angels? God's people, the reality of it is God's people are going to be ending up judging, making a judgment call of whether God has done what he should have done or not. Now, if we go to the Septuagint again, another time, it's very interesting. It says here, until which time the old one of days came, that's the Ancient of Days, and gave judgment to the holy ones of the highest. And the time, which is the Moed, this is right in Daniel 7 now, and the time, the Moed, the holy ones took of the kingdom. So the holy ones got the kingdom at the Moed, at the appointed time. We have another Moed here, an appointed time of the end, that the judgment will be given to the saints or God's people in the time of the end. There is a judgment call before Yeshua comes, because all decisions for eternity will have been made at that time. But when we have been saved, we will end up going to the Father's house. We've got many other videos that describe what that's going to look like. But we're told in the book of Revelation that we will reign with Yeshua for 1,000 years. We will be doing the work of judgment. And that judgment is going to involve a lot more than just judging why God has determined that some people were lost and some people were saved. We're going to be able to see that, but it will encompass more than that, as we're going to see here. We're going to get little glimpses of that as well. We are told that we will judge the world and we will judge angels. That's in 1 Corinthians 6, 2 and 3. In Revelation 20, that's when it tells us that we will reign with Christ for 1,000 years, and we will do that work then. So that will be our part of work in the time of reigning and judging the world. Not only seeing why God could not save certain people, those that were possibly very close to us, we're going to be able to see why he didn't save them, but we're going to be able to look at God's workings with man, and we're going to be able to see how perfect his character is through all of this, and it will become crystal clear at that point. The living by faith will not be as important as it is now, because we will then see face to face the goodness of God. So we see here the fourth kingdom shall devour the whole earth. In other words, in the presence of all the other beasts, the fourth kingdom will be the strongest, and it will be the one that implements the persecution of God's people and have the final solution. Does that sound familiar? The final solution. Who else used those terms? They will have the final solution for this planet to bring peace and prosperity to the whole world. Goes on to say in verse 24, 724, the 10 horns or 10 kings who shall arise out of this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. And this word after now is the word for after. So this other horn arrives after them, and he subdues 3 horns after. It doesn't say before. It doesn't use the word before, because that's a different word. Before is in the presence of. It rises up after the 10 kings, and it subdues 3 kings. So here again on the board, the subduing of the 3 kings has to happen during the time that the little horn is alive and well and doing its thing. And primarily, I think the reason for that is the three horns that are uprooted don't go along with the system. If this is a Catholic system, primarily, I think these are probably Protestant nations in the European Union that have decided they are not going to submit to Rome's authority, and they will lose their power at that time. That's a guess, a little speculation, but it's a very, I think, educated guess. In verse Daniel 7:8, it tells us that three horns are plucked up by the roots, before whom three fell, again, before in the presence of three fell, and that he would subdue, the little horn would subdue the three kings. Therefore, again, it has to happen during the time that the little horn is speaking, and the historical application that has been applied in the past, which I do not believe to be the fulfillment, the application says that judgment happens 50 years after the little horn's demise, which is not in keeping with what it actually says. And the three horns that are not uprooted outside of the reign of the little horn, because the little horn has to have power in order to uproot these three kings. We go on to 7:25 and 26. He shall speak pompous words, great things against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law. The saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. And I've had people say, I just want to bring this up here, is the word times is used, shall change times, and it's the same word times that's used in time, times and a half. So could it be that it's 3.5 appointed times? Well, 3.5 appointed times doesn't really make sense in and of itself. But no, it's a different word. When you go back into the Aramaic, it's a different word than the appointed time that is used in he will change times. So the changing of times has to do with appointed times, has to do with God's appointed times. So the persecution that it says, remember, we just got the main facts. God's people are being persecuted on what points? Primarily on the changing of the times, making it law that you cannot worship according to this time. You have to worship according to this time. When it says change times or alter times, different translations say it in a different way, it's out with the old and in with the new. So there's an exchanging thing taking place. The persecution of God's people will be much like it was in the time of Constantine, when he made laws that it was no longer, the Jewish people and the Christians were no longer allowed to celebrate the Passover and the festivals, and even do circumcision and the rest of these things. These are types that have gone before us, and we can see where we're going when we learn the lessons of the past and in history. The power that's coming is going to enforce certain times of worship and law. So it's going to do away with God's law, and it's going to put its own law, its own religious laws, in what it thinks to be what people need to do. And we can see this. This is not talking about just Sabbath. It's talking about all the festivals. And we can see this as we look at these words, which we're going to do briefly here. The court shall be seated. They shall take away his dominion. This really clears it up. The court shall be seated. They shall take away his dominion. That tells me that the court has to be seated during the time that the little horn is reigning, period. To consume and destroy it for how long? Forever. There's no rise of the little horn according to this, according to what it actually says after the little horn is destroyed. And according to the prophecy, he only gets a time, times and a half, which is 3.5 years. What interrupts his time frame? The court interrupts his time frame, so the little horn has to be judged during the time that he's reigning, and he loses his dominion at the end of the 3.5, because we find out in Revelation 17 that the 10 kings, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the 7 that are left over from the dreadful beast, hate the harlot and burn her with fire. We're going to really look at this stuff as we go, not today. We're not going to go there today, but just to make that clear here, there's more evidence, lots more evidence that we're going to get to on this. So that word changed times, that's the Aramaic word that was written in ancient Chaldean, and that word is zaman, and that is the same word as appointed times. So it really equals H4150, which is moed. So we can actually take the Aramaic now and see clearly that it parallels the moed. See that this little horn power is going to change God's appointed times, and that's how he's going to persecute, make it illegal to keep God's actually not only his appointed times, but even some of his laws. And this word also in the Greek, when we get down to the Greek, it tells us that in the Greek Septuagint, it tells us that this word times here, the changing the times, is an occasion that is a set or proper time, always opportunity, season time, a while, or compare 5550. So this word here, even in the Greek, means the same thing as it does in the ancient Chaldean and in the Hebrew. We're all talking about the same thing here at the time of the end. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heavens shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is so loaded here. Paul said that it was not lawful for him to reveal what he saw when he went up into the third heaven. I wonder why, because everyone would thought he was nuts. And so he couldn't do that. I think there's some deeper meaning in this text than what we really understand when we think about then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole earth. No, that's not what it says. Under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom, Yeshua's kingdom, is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions under the whole of heaven shall serve and obey him. We are joint heirs with Yeshua and will reign all the dominions under the whole heavens, not just the earth, under the whole heavens. And his dominion is a great and everlasting dominion. We don't understand what God is calling us to be sons and daughters of the great King. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. Okay, so we're going to wind it up there right now. So let me kind of conclude what I've said here. I'll try and make this short and sweet as I can. Number one, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 10 through 12 are for the time of the end. The little horn, although these prophecies have been applied in the past by well-meaning people, they have not had the full light on these prophecies, and we've got to look at them again. When we have a closer look at them again, we can see the inconsistencies quite clearly in the prophecies. So we should expect to look at these prophecies in a different way as they pertain to the time in which we live. The little horn, therefore, the great persecution of God's people, the time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation, is not in the past through the persecution of the little horn through the dark ages, but is yet in the future. The great persecution of God's people all over this planet is still in the future. And friends, we've got to brace for this because it's not going to be a fun ride. But through it all, it says that the just shall live by faith. We're going to come out on the other side as rulers alongside Yeshua under the whole of heaven. Now, I don't know, doesn't that sound worth hanging on for? Absolutely, that sounds worth hanging on for. So So that finishes up our study. Our next one, we're going to go from here. We're going to launch into Revelation 13 and demonstrate how Revelation 13 is exactly the same prophecy as Daniel 7, but it gives us more information. More information on the little horn, more information on the 10 kings, more information on the New World Order and the One World Order system, and the mark of the beast, actually, and the destruction of Babylon. It's all contained in there, and the last call for God's people when judgment comes, when judgment actually comes. Father in heaven, we ask that you would continue to lead us and guide us into all truth. And I know, Father, that some of these things are new to many people, but Father, help us all to realize that your word is the final authority. Not a priest, not a pastor, not a conference leader, not a president. Father, we recognize those that have gone before us have done the best they could, but some of these things were not for them to understand. And we ask that you continue to unfold these prophecies, not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of our families, those that we love, those of our friends. And Father, we want to have a part in this great work of calling out your people towards your kingdom. Be with us, we pray. Help us to understand these things better. We pray these things in the name of Yeshua, who is returning to take us home. We pray this in his name. Amen.